And welcome to our BEAD application workshop. First of all, I want to know which one of you brought the cold with you. It is cold in Richmond today. Craig said he brought the cold. And so thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm really excited. As you all know, we have made great strides through the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative and the Line Extension Customer Assistance Program with ticking the box towards closing the digital divide. And so BEAD will allow us through the infrastructure portion of the funding to completely close the digital divide from an infrastructure standpoint. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity of working myself out of a job as I get closer to the 20 years towards retirement. You guys are supposed to laugh at that. I have 3 more years for 20. And so we're going to hear from our team at DHCD today, along with our consultant, RSM, as well as folks from Stellonic. Did I pronounce that right? Tomorrow will be from Stellonic. And so you all will get great information from the team regarding the BEAD requirements, as well as next steps. And so with that, I'll go ahead and officially turn the workshop over to Chandler.
Okay, welcome everybody. How's the microphone volume for folks in the back? Okay, great. This is designed to be conversational. I know we're in a lecture hall and it probably feels like a lecture hall, and if it doesn't now, it certainly will by 3 o'clock. But we want to make sure this is as much of a back and forth as possible. So if you do have questions, feel free to throw a hand up. Stop us where we're at. We want to get to those now. Just some other housekeeping things. We do have a microphone for folks if they do want to ask questions. That is so we can get the questions on the recording, right? I mean, we can probably hear each other in here, but the folks online can't hear us. So we want to make sure that we're distributing that microphone around if we do have audience Q&A, hopefully throughout the meeting today. Restrooms, most of you have probably already found them, but restrooms are back in the main hall of this building in the back left-hand corner. And with that, I think that wraps up most of the housekeeping things. Today we're going to be in this room. Tomorrow morning we're going to be in the room across the hall from here. So feel free to come around, just a little before 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I think they open the doors at 8. But if you're coming back tomorrow, just be here close to 9 o'clock in that room across the hallway from where we're at now. So we've got a couple of just introductory comments before we get into kind of where we're at today on BEAD. The BEAD program, as we know, is something we've been working to in terms of the application phase for a long time now. We've been working through the challenge process. Ironically, there's a mapping exhibit here currently on display at the Library of Virginia. You should go check that out. We've been doing the same thing for the last 3 years on broadband availability. The mapping process has then lended itself towards planning for the BEAD application process. That was called Volume 2 of the BEAD initial proposal. Now we're getting into the point where the rubber hits the road on the BEAD process. We laid out kind of that basic elementary timeline at our application development workshop back last May. And for the sake of being honest, in May we said thought we were going to get rolling with the BEAD application process quite a bit sooner than where we're at today. We've been working with NTIA a lot to get approval of our challenge process results, meaning the number of locations and where those locations are that are eligible for the BEAD program. We feel that we are very close to getting that approval. I don't want to commit to a timeline there, but we're very close to getting those locations approved and going back and forth with NTIA over just a matter of a couple days turnaround to make sure we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's to get the locations approved to run the BEAD program on. There are going to be about 131,000 locations across Virginia that are going to be BEAD eligible. Just to kind of reference that point, what we've built up to this point under the VADI program is around 135,000 locations that we've been building out through the existing investments. We've still got a ways to go on those, a couple 100,000 locations left in existing project footprints. But the BEAD program for us in Virginia is very much, thanks to you guys, the downward haul to get to the last 130,000 or so locations that don't have broadband access. So to talk about where we're at now in the point of the BEAD program, we've been going back and forth with NTIA about challenge process results. We've covered that. Once we get those challenge process results approved, we're going to fully open up our application phase. We've partially opened up that application phase starting on December 1st after we collected the BEAD letters of intent. That was a bit of an adjustment in process. We thought that we'd have approval of locations by December 1st. We have not, unfortunately, gotten approval of those locations. Getting those locations approved has to feed the portal that we are going to collect the scored materials in. So we can't open up the scored materials portal until we get the number of locations approved, figure out where those locations are, how many are in each zip code area. So we will open up that scoring portal as soon as we get those locations approved by NTIA. But the narrative component of the application process started on December 1st, on Sunday, according to the guidance we published and in line with the guidance we published. That was after the letter of intent phase closed on November 30th. That letter of intent phase collected 47 letters of intent from broadband providers across the Commonwealth, as well as some that are outside the Commonwealth interested in doing business here, which is great. Wide range of technology types. We hear a lot about the BEAD program being fiber focused. We're pleased to say that the letters of intent we've received are from technology types that run the gamut: fiber, fixed wireless, satellite connectivity, low Earth orbit satellite especially. And those letters of intent we're doing analysis on now, but also reflect a great bit of geographical diversity. We'll have more to report on this front at the Broadband Advisory Council meeting on Friday, which you should tune into. The details of that we can share are publicly available on the Commonwealth calendar. We'll have more details there about the level of interest per city and county across Virginia, to let folks know how many letters of intent were submitted per city and county, because as you know, as representing companies that have hopefully submitted a letter of intent, if not, we may have to break some news to you about eligibility to participate in BEAD. That should be a data point of interest about who's interested where under the BEAD program. We will also post those letters of intent publicly very soon for folks to go in and see exactly who has submitted a letter of intent to participate under BEAD. I want to provide a brief summary about the workshop we conducted back in May. In May, we dived into the nitty-gritty of what the BEAD Volume 2 is in Virginia. We have received approval of that Volume 2, and we've been boiling that very in-the-weeds content down to something that is publicly available, publicly understandable. And to kind of highlight what we went over back in May at that workshop, a lot of this conversation was based around how we're going to structure applications in Virginia's BEAD application process. There's two options you can submit, and we're going to go over those tomorrow morning when we preview that zip code application portal with the Stellonic team. That's going to come tomorrow morning, but there's two different ways to submit those applications. One is a bundled approach and one is a single zip code approach, and we'll go over that in detail again tomorrow morning. One thing we wanted to highlight again that we covered back in May is that the BEAD program is not solely driven by the lowest bid wins. This is a scoring process that has multiple considerations. A couple of things that are going to be huge factors in determining the outcome of the BEAD winner in each zip code are going to be whether or not that applicant has a letter of support from the local government. So if you're not already working on that, you should be reaching out to local governments to solicit letters of support. That is from cities, counties, or tribal governments that ought to be reaching out to around this time, especially as we get those locations approved by NTIA and published for public consumption, reaching out to counties and cities to solicit that letter of support from them. We have guidance online for those counties and cities when it comes to submitting or comes to considering letters of support requests from you guys. So if you're curious of what we're advising local governments to do when they're considering those requests, go online, check it out, it's there. There's been a lot of work, and this is my closing point on this slide, there's been a lot of work into streamlining the application process under BEAD. There's no secret, there's a lot of narrative out there about how onerous or potentially burdensome the BEAD application process is. We've done as much as we can at the state level to make sure that that application process is as streamlined as it can be for you all. That's coming in the form of a one narrative application where you submit your narratives in bulk, and the RSM team is going to be going over what those narrative requirements are over the next couple of days. There's also going to be that separate portal where you submit your scored information. Again, this is meant to streamline as much as possible, but also fulfill all the requirements of the BEAD program that we're obligated to report to NTIA, the federal agency that administers BEAD. For the sake of making sure we cover it, I also want to make sure that we point out that we already have a lot of this material written up online on our website, dhcd.virginia.gov/BEAD. Tens, probably not hundreds, but in the tens of hyperlinked resources there available for folks to go in and read exactly what we're going to be providing as information over the next couple of days. Things to do homework on afterwards, things to send to folks that are going to be writing the application materials to get prepared for the BEAD program. I think the best practice here that we'd recommend is that as you're writing the narratives, you also have pulled up side by side what the requirement is that we're looking for and what we're going to be analyzing your application on. So, for example, if you're fulfilling the requirement around managerial capability, I would be sure to go to the appendix of managerial capability in our application guidance, version 1.2. Also, the PowerPoint that shows the nitty-gritty requirements of managerial capability. So be sure to extensively look at that and use it kind of as a side-by-side when you're developing the application. Now, of course, it's really important to cover and be upfront and honest that the guidance coming from NTIA, our adaptations to that are ongoing, right? And how we're going to be doing this is through what's called policy notices. We're going to go over all of those in this presentation in the first hour block here. And somebody please keep me on time and keep me honest. I'm going to look to the RSM folks on that. 1:13 now. I think this is supposed to wrap it. Just holler at me. We'll figure that out. The policy notices are our way to adapt to NTIA guidance coming out. There are 5 that are currently out there. We're going to go through all 5. There are a couple more that are coming, and we'll have the opportunity to provide input on those that are still coming down the pipeline from us, which is translative from NTIA guidance that is still coming out for states to use to conduct the BEAD program. There's a method behind the madness of putting out, additional guidance, right? I mean, we're not just lobbing these, tennis balls out there on the court just for you to hit back to us and tell us that this is way too much and we don't want to run by these things. The reason we put out the policy notices is to, one, elaborate on the guidance that we published previously that could have been interpreted as vague. The other one is to make sure that we're all on a level playing field when it comes to submitting applications under the BEAD program. NTIA puts a lot of guidance to states about conducting an open, fair, and transparent process, right? A great goal we should all have. And policy notices are our way of making sure that we're conducting that open, fair, and transparent process. Before I get any further and go on into the specific policy notices that we've published so far, what questions do y'all have from the group? We're getting some doors shut in the back to eliminate the squeaky wheels. And Okay. So we're going to go through these one by one. Again, this is meant to be conversational. Please do throw a hand up, ask a question, stop me from talking if something doesn't make sense or needs additional explanation. The first policy notice, and this is in chronological order as they're published on our website, so if you want to go to the website and read through it as I'm talking through it, please do. The first policy notice is declining high-scoring awards based on technical capability. So in our BEAD application development process, as structured by the NTIA regs to us, the BEAD scoring engine is very quantitatively based, right? It's a numbers-based process. Reasonably so. There are a little over 1,000 zip codes in Virginia that we have to crunch the numbers on and see who's going to be the prevailing provisionally selected subawardee in those zip codes. As a result of a numbers-based process, sometimes things get through the process that might need additional scrutiny, and reviewing applicants, the high-scoring applicants for their responses around technical capability and managerial capability is one way that we're going to additionally vet the high-scoring awardee in each one of these zip codes. There's a process for us to do that and a public display and ability for folks to weigh in on the determinations we make through this process. So you can see what we've got written up on the slide here. What this boils down to is that when we're reviewing application materials, which will be during the month of March, after you submit them on March 1st, we're going to be going through and within a matter of days be able to see who this high scoring awardee is in each zip code tabulation area. When we see that, what we'll do is go back and, in addition to vetting all the submissions of narrative applications, we'll go back and especially look at the high-scoring awardees in each zip code to make sure that what we know as best practices of construction, best practices of deployment in those areas are what are going to be practiced by that high-scoring awardee. If we elect to decline awarding a high-scoring applicant, we're going to justify that and put it in writing in our final proposal. That final proposal will be published for a 14-day public comment period in the month of June. There's guidance out there now that says we're going to publish that for a 30-day public comment period. In practice, maybe we're going to be between 14 and 30 days. We will let you guys know when we're going to, how long that public comment period is going to be. But we initially said 30 based on NTIA guidance. NTIA guidance has come out since and said 14 days. So we're going to see what the timeline looks like for us to get that final proposal to NTIA by our deadline, I think, of July 25th. 2025 is when we absolutely have to submit our final proposal to NTIA with those award recommendations up to them. Questions there on this policy notice? Okay. This might be becoming a lecture hall too quickly. Man, tough crowd. Okay, next policy notice, handling missing or incomplete or non-compliant applicant information. Riveting stuff. You guys have always heard us talk about under the VADI program that the VADI program is an open book test. To the extent we can, to the extent we can offer that kind of olive branch in a standardized process to all grantees, BEAD is going to be as much of an open book test as well as we can make it. There's a few ways that we're going to do that. I've got 3 ways highlighted on here in this kind of policy notice structure that we're giving to reaching out to folks that have missing, incomplete, or non-compliant information. So in the missing information bucket from your submitted application, let's say that you're going through the application process and you just completely miss a question in its entirety, right? It's just blank, a blank response in the narrative CAMS portal. What we're going to do is, once we notice that it's a missing response, we'll reach out to you in writing via email from the broadband email inbox, and you'll have 1 business day following notification to submit that response. Presumably, if it's a missing material and the response field is blank, you likely had that prepared, you just didn't paste it over into the application process. So that's the logic behind 1 business day to get that to us if you have a missing application material in its entirety. For incomplete information, this is kind of falling into the bucket of if there's a multi-part question, which there are many, and if you're missing missing a response to one of the parts of the multi-part question, but have answered the other parts of that, we're going to give you 2 business days after we notify you to respond to that aspect of things. And I see a bunch of folks taking pictures. Please do take pictures. This is also all in writing online at dhcd.virginia.gov/BEAD. The third bucket here, and the third kind of scenario we envision, and I think this will be a one that's probably used most frequently, is if folks are submitting non-compliant information from submitted applications. So the example we outline here is on cybersecurity, right? There's a lot of cybersecurity provisions under the BEAD program that have to be considered, factored in, pledged to by the broadband providers, and put into practice. So if we read your cybersecurity plan and realize this is not compliant with NTIA's guidance and the NIST guidance that has come out for cybersecurity that the RSM team is going to go over later today or tomorrow, we're going to give you 3 days to correct that and respond to it. We'll tell you what's missing. We'll tell you what's non-compliant and allow you 3 business days to go back, correct that information. Specifically, these last 2 with the incomplete information and the non-compliant information, we're making those available on specific sections of the BEAD application process, right? There are responses in the BEAD application process like technical and managerial capability that ought to come in complete for the first round of submissions, right? You should be able to elaborate on your group, your company's ability to build out broadband networks under the BEAD program and elaborate on technical and managerial capability, right? There are things that get in the very complicated, like cybersecurity, for example. Perhaps the letter of credit didn't have all of the I's dotted and T's crossed. In those instances, that's when we'll be reaching out for the incomplete information and the non-compliant information, just to get the narrative part of the application compliant enough for us that if you are the high-scoring awardee in that zip code, that we can move forward with selecting you as a provisionally awarded subgrantee. Questions there before I move on to the next one? Yep, and we're gonna do this. We're gonna run you the microphone. Give me some time. If I could tag in one of the people in the back to be a microphone runner, I'll do it. Yeah, tell us who you are, what you represent.
Good to see you too. Chandler, actually, could you go to the previous slide if you don't mind? And this is just for my own clarification. Tristan McDonald, VCTA Broadband Association Virginia, represent cable broadband companies. You had mentioned the difference or potential change from 30 days to, I believe, 13. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So does that, could you re-explain that real quick? Because I think I have a question based on that.
Sure. The question and I'm just going to repeat it online just in case we're not picking it up
Sure.
for insurance reasons. The question was back to the comment that was made about how long we will post our final proposal draft for public comment. The response there is that we initially slated to post that public comment period for 30 days on our final proposal draft. Since we committed to 30 days, NTIA guidance has been released that that public comment window is now allowed to be as short as 14 days. We have not made that change yet to go from 30 to 14. If we do, it'll be publicly announced in a policy notice like this. But if we do, the basis of that decision is going to be based on how much time and how much runway do we have after analyzing the applicants to meet our July 25th deadline of 2025 to submit our final proposal to NTIA. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess would, in the case that it does get changed from 30 days to 13, I'm just thinking of some of our larger providers who maybe are in other states, probably at 30 days would be better for us. Just my thought. But as these kind of guidance are getting put out, will people be getting notifications just so that they are aware, in addition to obviously just daily monitoring the website?
Yeah, we will put out notifications there. We have a whole nother policy notice about ongoing stakeholder engagement and technical assistance in the process. So that's going to be on a couple of slides further down the line from here.
Perfect. Thanks.
I think another question, perhaps? Yeah.
I'm Tom Ennis with All Points Broadband. You mentioned the timing for this to put up a 14 or 30-day period in June and then submit the proposal to NTIA at the end of July. So would you have the 30-day provider engagement period after you explain the declining high scoring awards process, or would that occur before this?
So the way we envision the process now, based on the guidance that we have, is when we elect, and this is kind of merging the answer between the last two policy notices we cover, like if we do elect to not award a high scoring awardee based on technical or managerial capability, that justification will be baked into our final proposal that we release for public comment for a between 14 and 30-day calendar period. Others? Last thing to highlight on this slide about missing, incomplete, non-compliant information. This is going to happen during the month of March. Barring any unforeseen scheduling, we will have the application deadline on March 1st. And then if you're an applicant, it's very likely everybody's going to fall into at least one of these categories. We're going to be reaching out to you to ask you to submit missing information, incomplete information, non-compliant info. It's all going to be during the month of March. We're telling our folks transparently, internally, to please don't take vacations during the month of March. We're going to need to be buckled in and reviewing BEAD applications during that time. So would ask, too, that you stay close by email during that period to make sure you can get responses back into us in the allotted time frame. Another question.
Yeah, the question is,
Who
you
are you
mentioned
ready from?
several times, sorry, Robert Bridgham, Eastern Shore Broadband Authority. You mentioned March a couple of times, and I know it's supposed to be a 90-day interval, but since the portal's not open and the maps aren't fully released, how do we stay within that 90-day? We're losing time towards that 90 days. So is that being taken into account? Are we shifting days as that map approval waits, or are we supposed to be moving forward anyways?
So the question was, originally it was stated that a 90-day application window would be there. How does the delay in getting locations approved and opening up the zip code portal impact that March 1st deadline of 90 days? And we did put out an email, if it wasn't last week, it was the week before, that we're going to open up the narrative component of the application now, and that happened on December 1st. That will be open for that 90 calendar day window. The zip code portal will be open for no less than 60 days. So if we do not have locations approved by January 1st, 60 days before March 1st, that would then move the March 1st deadline back. But we will have the zip code portal opened up for no less than 60 days to make sure folks have time to submit. I've made a fool out of myself of giving bad time estimations in the past, but I certainly hope that we're going to be able to open up the zip code portal in the middle of this month. All right. Next policy notice revolves around how we can announce awards. Getting into the details here, NTIA has a defined process for states that states must go through to be able to publicly announce awards. Two ways that we could end up, this is going kind of starting at the end and moving backwards. There are two ways that we could publicly announce awards to the general public. One is through the publication of our draft final proposal that we release for public comment, and thereby that's the announcement of awards when we release that final proposal for public comment, or a separate award announcement, separate of the draft final proposal release. But if we do that second route where it's a separate award announcement, separate of releasing our draft final proposal for public comment, that has to happen after NTIA has conducted their initial review to make sure we've lived up to the process we promised to. Those are the two options that we have for publicly announcing awards under the BEAD program. What that means for you guys, because if you're attuned to the process, you're thinking, well, how are we going to know where the last 5% of locations are that we can submit individual proposals on if we haven't announced awards for the main zip code tabulation areas? How we're going to handle that and what's compliant with NTIA's process is that once we finalize that zip code portal round, right, where we have collected the information from you all, we've identified the provisionally selected subgrantee in each zip code, we then, as the broadband office, have a meeting with NTIA to make sure that we conducted our process in accordance with what we promised to. Once we conduct that meeting, we can confidentially notify you that you've been awarded or selected as the provisionally selected awardee in the zip codes that we're selecting you to be the provisionally selected subgrantee in. So that would come via email notification. We would notify you all of the zip codes that you have been selected as the provisionally high scoring, provisionally selected subawardee in. This would likely happen sometime during the pending the review process, pending how long that process takes for us to vet applications under the BEAD program. So that covers that first bullet and that first kind of bold text on this slide of after the conclusion of the 90-day window. When we do notify you, if you are a provisionally selected subawardee in any zip code, that communication is absolutely 100% confidential. If released, will jeopardize your status as a subawardee under the BEAD program. So it must be held confidential if we do notify you that you are provisionally selected as a subawardee under BEAD. So after that notification of awardees and zip codes, that's when the 30-day application window starts, right? So we would release a list of locations at this time that did not receive a proposal to be served in the winner's application in each zip code, right? Going back to our May workshop, this is the up to 5% of locations in each zip code that were not included in the awarded applicants area. So we would release those collection of locations, probably hundreds, low thousands of locations across Virginia. At that point, we run through the same process for awardees that we did in the first round. We may notify you of the individual locations that you are awarded in this location by location level award process in that 30-day window after we've had a chance to review the applications. That communication similarly confidential. Those communications are confidential. You're not allowed to share where you were provisionally selected as the awardee until we release it ourselves to the public. So I'm kind of tying this back into where we started here. When we announce this to the public, we're either going to do it through the final proposal draft that's released for public comment, or we're going to do it by separate announcement before we drop the final proposal draft for public comment. So a lot of technicalities there, but again, us threading the needle to make sure that we're complying with the guidance that we've been given, notifying you as the provisionally selected subgrantee, and then kind of moving through the rest of the process to make sure that we're not having folks trying to do back of the napkin math based on the number of locations that are remaining in the 30-day round, who won here, who won where, based on the initial applications submitted.
Thank you. Hey, Chandler, Chris DeBosier with Verizon. One question I have is, where does the extremely high cost threshold figure come into the second application window in particular?
Great question. So the question was, where does the extremely high cost threshold factor into this process. For folks that are learning more about BEAD, the extremely high cost threshold is the value that states set at which they will not award a fiber proposal under BEAD above, right? So I'm just going to pick a number out of a hat. If it's $9,800, do not interpret that as where we're going to be at or close to where we're going to be at. But if we just say $9,800 is the extremely high cost threshold in Virginia, we will not award a fiber proposal over $9,800 per location and requested BEAD funding in that first round. So that's what the extremely high cost threshold and function will look like. We will set that extremely high cost threshold during the review process of that 90-day application window. That'll be during the month of March. And then in practice, that extremely high cost threshold that we have set at that time, going into the 30-day window, folks can request a waiver to that extremely high cost threshold if they're trying to pick up a single location that exceeds that $9,800 or whatever it may be value. So that's where it functions in practice and how it would live out for if a company was trying to submit a fiber proposal in the second 30-day round. Okay, as promised, this is getting into how we're going to keep folks informed throughout the process here. This is less of a nitty-gritty policy notice, and I know this may seem silly, but more of just kind of outlining expectations for folks that this is how we're going to be communicating to ensure an open, fair, and transparent subgrantee selection process under the BEAD program. 3 things here. We're going to be more rigid than we have been in the past about where you can submit questions, right? Don't ad hoc email one of the team members like you have perhaps under the past to receive an answer about the VOD program or LECAP or whatever it may be. Make sure you send those questions about the BEAD program to broadband@dhcd.virginia.gov. That's going to be our clearinghouse for answering questions. Make sure we can give consistent and timely feedback to folks that are submitting questions under the BEAD program. So if you have a question about BEAD from here on out, starting December 1st, you've got to send it in writing to broadband@dhcd.virginia.gov. If you'd like to also schedule a conversation, use the same email, right? That's how we're going to have the clearinghouse there for folks if they want to set up a time to talk for a 30-minute or hour phone call. Just make sure that scheduling request goes to the broadband email inbox. Starting next week, at a time to be announced, we're going to also be holding weekly office hours for folks. This will just be a 1-hour block each week until we hit the March 1st deadline for folks to join in as they'd like, ask questions, just a standing time each week for people to jump in a public forum and ask any questions they may have about the BEAD program. Both us from the Office of Broadband and the RSM team are going to be on those weekly office hours for folks. The last one is kind of an if needed here, ad hoc webinars, technical assistance sessions. If we start getting a lot of questions from folks that are of the same flavor or variety, we'll have a technical assistance session about that particular topic to make sure we're just sending out timely information and catching folks up on what is required of the BEAD program. We've made it to the end of the first 5 policy notices. I've got a slide coming up about what's coming next in terms of additional policy notices, but I want to take a pause here, see if there are any questions from the group. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Bill Macris. Quick question, going back to the high cost threshold, we have a sense what the high cost is going to be before the application is submitted. If we have a sense that when we start doing the engineering, we realize it's going to be above that threshold, then maybe it's not worth submitting the application. Are you saying that after the submission of the applications, you're going to determine that high cost threshold?
That's correct. So in practice, what we'll do in Virginia is we will select what our extremely high cost threshold is for fiber proposals after that 90-day application window is closed and we've received those proposals to us. I think there's a second part to that question that I'm forgetting there, and would ask that you ask it over again, please.
No, that's all I wanted to know. Is it's not something we'll know prior to the submission of the applications. It's afterwards. So that's
right. Yep, you're correct. The one thing I wanted to provide too, though, is that the structure of our process would encourage you to go ahead and engineer the network without consideration of what that high cost threshold is, right? We have like the 95% minimum location requirement within each zip code that each priority and non-priority proposal has to meet. So if you're going to be engineering a network to submit an application under BEAD, it needs to make sure that you hit 95% of locations at a minimum in each zip code area, and that would determine the outcome of your cost there.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. It's just that trying to make assessments based upon pole attachments and what the ground is like there, whether we're drilling or whatnot, may be difficult. So, but okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Glenn Springthorpe with FastLink Communications. Is the extremely high cost threshold going to be set statewide, or is that going to be by zip code basis?
We anticipate setting that high cost threshold statewide.
I'm Amber with IWIS.
Kevin, go ahead. We just got to get it for the folks online.
Okay. Well, I'm Amber with IWIS. You mentioned there was 5 policy notices, but I feel like you've only covered 4.
Okay. Let me verify.
Yeah.
No, this is good. Thank you. I've got 5 here: declining high scoring awards based on technical assistance, handling missing, incomplete, or non-compliant applicant information, notification of provisionally selected awards and public announcement of awards, policy notice on technical assistance, stakeholder engagement, and communications. Yes, I have only done 4. The last one is the best one. Yeah, you want to come up here? We could change places. Yeah, come on. Yeah, thank you for catching that. And a reminder for folks online too, if you could mute yourself too, please, if you're not talking online. The last one is one to certainly park ourselves on and get in the weeds here. We've heard from a lot of folks about the confidence or lack thereof of the output of the BEAD challenge process in 2 different ways. There's been commentary from folks that, hey, I already serve some of these locations under the challenge process as an output of your challenge process. Another one is that, and we talked extensively about this in May, that there are hay bales and rocks and other fake locations that should not be provided broadband access and would be a waste of taxpayer dollars to thereby serve. We have a process now to handle that. And again, I've talked a lot about NTIA guidance. NTIA guidance as it goes along has been incredibly helpful. And this is an example of one of those where we've been given the flexibility now to kind of tag locations out of BEAD obligations based on whether or not they already have broadband access after the challenge process results have been approved, or if they're a fake location like a rock or a hay bale. There's more examples than that out there, and we have spelled all of those out in the policy notice that was actually updated yesterday to flesh out all of the specific reason codes that folks can identify by location that's BEAD eligible should not be considered to be served under the BEAD program. I'll go through the actual slideshow now to the extent that I've missed any locations, but the way you would submit this information to us is that you would identify it in the application process. You would submit these locations, the specific reason codes, the justification, the evidence in a template CSV file that we've posted online that you can download from our website. You would submit that template Excel file to us through the CAMS portal with your application process. And you would also submit the required evidence there for each individual location that you're trying to deobligate yourself from potentially serving under the BEAD program. So how we're going to consider that is, if you are the broadband provider that has been selected as the provisionally awarded subgrantee, we are going to look at your response in that zip code. As long as we agree with the evidence you've submitted and it meets the standards of NTIA and meets our standards of review, we will take those locations out of your obligation to serve under the BEAD program. So that's the bare bones and structure of the process here that we're going to conduct to kind of tag out these fake locations or previously served locations under BEAD. And I would certainly ask you that be one of probably the first things that you do in the application process is, based on where you intend to apply, you do some level of analysis of, are these locations perhaps already served? Are these locations uninhabitable? Are they actually rocks? Are they actually hay bales? So that's our newly released process about how we're going to handle those, and we will consider the responses that you submit here in the areas that you're selected as the provisionally awarded subgrantee. Questions there? As we're getting into this one, if I can get online here in a coherent way, what I'll do is show folks on our website these specific reason codes, because I know this is an area statewide about these kind of. Slow internet, ironic. For the tutorial for folks that are just perhaps seeing this recently, this is our BEAD landing page. Everything you need to know about BEAD is on this website. The information about this webinar, the information about the application process, and this two-phase application process of opening up the zip code portal for no less than 60 days. Our approved plans from NTIA, information about the challenge process and the results that are hopefully approved soon. And then here's where we get into BEAD application process, documents and resources. This is where the kind of the nitty-gritty is on the website of where you need to go to make sure that you're getting all the information you need to complete an application. The most important of which is going to be, and I'm zooming in a little bit for readability, this BEAD application guidance for broadband providers. Make sure you start here when you're developing an application under BEAD, and then visiting all these other resources that are online as well to develop the specific components of the application. But back to the actual topic, here is the policy notice on identifying and deobligating non-broadband serviceable locations. Not going to read this word for word, but you can see here us placing into practice NTIA guidance about why locations under the BEAD program may not require service under BEAD. So please go read this for yourself. Ask us questions afterwards, as long as those questions go to broadband@dhcd.virginia.gov. And Tom now will take the question.
Maybe I'll submit a question to the email address as well. But you'd mentioned that the provisionally awarded applicant would be evaluated on the locations that they believe not to be serviceable or to be served. What about all of the applicants who go to a ZCTA? Would you not evaluate all of their claims or just the one that's provisionally awarded?
It's a great question. The reason we went the route of just identifying the locations of the provisionally awarded subawardee was simply out of timing in preparing the final proposal to NTIA. This could, if we did consider all submissions across all applicants for a zip code, that would liken us to opening up the challenge process all over again. And out of the interest of timing and trying to standardize this process, that's why we went with using the submission of the provisionally identified subawardee here instead of opening up for honoring all submissions essentially under this process.
And then a follow-up question: if a locality, I believe a locality can say whether or not a location is a real location, would that be shared with all of the prospective applicants who submitted a letter of interest in that county?
That's certainly something we can look into post-award, and would ask you submit that in writing to the broadband email inbox. Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions there before I move on? Okay, talking about what's next in terms of policy notices. A few things that folks ought to consider as we move along under the BEAD program. NTIA has given states in the form of a public comment document alternative technology guidance to consider under the BEAD program. Specifically, this is related to locations that we would seek to propose to serve with an alternative technology, which is primarily likely going to happen under that secondary 30-day application process. NTIA's public comment version of this guidance, which has yet to be finalized, outlines a specific process about things we must consider as a state before we award a alternative technology for that location. Things like if there's already an enforceable commitment, like a grant award for an alternative technology that we need to consider that would not have been considered based on the definition of broadband under the BEAD program previously. So there's a few examples there. I'm happy to point you to that draft policy notice by NTIA so you can see what our requirements are to them when we submit the final proposal to kind of get an orientation of what this might end up looking like. But we'll post that policy notice as soon as we get final word from NTIA on alternative technology guidance from us. The other couple of things are items that we've been receiving more and more interest on as of late. The first of which is consortium applications. And then if a consortium application does come into the application process, how do we assign out locations and kind of break up that consortium to manage those as individual projects? NCIA does have guidance out there for states on that. We'll be basing the development of this policy notice around the NCIA guidance on that front. So be on the lookout there on consortium applications and assignment of awarded locations. The other thing too would be a policy notice on assigning locations within a zip code post-award. Considering development of this policy notice because as folks have identified, the BEAD challenge process results sometimes may lend themselves to broadband providers or multiple broadband providers in a particular zip code, dividing and conquering the obligations to serve BEAD eligible locations in a particular zip code. So we're working and thinking through a process that would allow for assigning locations post-award to broadband providers within zip codes other than that provisionally selected subaward awardee. The last thing we're working through as well, considering performance-based remittances for sub-awards. As you all know and have experienced in the VADI program, we currently manage our awards on a cost reimbursement basis. Under the BEAD program for low-risk awarded sub-grantees, we would consider, through this policy notice, granting performance-based remittances, meaning that once you complete a key project milestone, that unlocks a remittance from our office. There would still be some financial justification in making sure that you're submitting justification of expenditures to us at some level, but we're currently working through the design there of that policy notice as well. So if you have any thoughts, concerns, comments about these future policy notices, please do reach out to our office. Happy to take those calls as scheduled through the broadband email inbox. And we've got one now.
Thanks. Tris McDonald again, Broadband Association Virginia. When you say low risk, is that as defined by the budget this year, or when we're talking about BADI, or how are you defining low risk?
Yeah, the question was in consideration of the performance-based remittances for subawards. I use the terminology that this may be offered to low-risk applicants. That definition of low risk, to get into the particulars, is not related to any other definition of low risk that we currently have as a broadband office. We would make those determinations in evaluation of the responses submitted in the narrative section of the BEAD application process and potentially the scope of award that a provider might receive under the BEAD process. Is how we would determine risk individually under that. Okay. Timeline slide. Won't spend too much time here because, as we know, this is moving and developing and depends a lot on when we receive approval of our challenge results. We did launch the application process on December 1st. Tentatively, we're going to close that application process on March 1st. A lot of TBAs and TBDs in there about when we provisionally notify you on a confidential basis of if you've received an award under the BEAD process. When we open up that secondary 30-day window for folks to submit to serve individual locations that were left out of the first round. And then when the governor announces awards, when we post the final proposal for public comment, and when we submit BEAD's final proposal to NTIA. What's not on here, but what we have emphasized is that our deadline to submit that final proposal to NTIA is 1 year after we got our Volume 2 approved. We got our Volume 2 approved on July 25th, so we have to submit our final proposal to NTIA on July 25th, 2025, and factor in that public comment period before that submission date. We've made it through policy notices and timelines. What questions do y'all have, if you're still awake? Okay, I'm going to pull up our schedule slide from the RSM team and then kind of calculate what that means in terms of a break and then coming back in afterwards. So we're quite a bit ahead of schedule. And currently 1:52. We had scheduled a 15-minute break. Let's be back in here at 2:10. 18-minute break, 2:10, be back in the room. We'll get rolling with the next component of this, getting into RSM's content. So see you all in 18 minutes. Sure.
With one of them. The growing winds caught at the loose strands of her hair, the fading sunlight making it glow like tendrils of honey. His soldiers moved aside for her, inclined their heads to her, respected her. The image
Okay, welcome back, everybody. If we can go ahead and be grabbing seats in the room. For the sake of consistency, I had a couple of frequent questions asked out in the hallway while we were gone. Going back to this policy notice about locations that are misidentified, not real, rocks, hay bales, that sort of thing. One of the codes up here as an eligible reason to kind of tag in a hay bale or a rock as not fundable under the BEAD program, or that an applicant should be deobligated from serving that, is reason code number 7, which is insufficient funds. We do not see a use case for this in Virginia because we believe we have sufficient funds under the BEAD program to be able to get to everyone with some kind of broadband technology. There are other states out there that do not have the level of funding they believe is necessary to get to all of the unserved, lacking 25.3, and underserved, lacking 100/20 locations. So what we're interpreting this to be from NTIA is that a code 7 is for the states that can say they're going to serve all of their unserved locations that lack 25.3, but they're not able to get to all of their underserved locations that lack 100/20. So if you submit a code 7 in Virginia on a location, one, we're going to be very reluctant to grant that request, and you should probably reach out to us ahead of time to identify what the reason is about why you're proposing to deobligate yourself from serving that location if you're selected as the provisional awardee under BEAD. So that tackles code 7 there. Happy to answer any follow-up questions throughout the meeting. But for the next component of the presentation, we're going to get into the technical requirements under the BEAD program. We have a few slated for today. We have a few slated for tomorrow, but this is to make sure that all applicants are clearing the requirements of the BEAD program to make sure that you're competitive and you also meet the compliance standards under BEAD. So in Virginia, we've brought on the RSM team to help us kind of digest these requirements for us, but also for you all as broadband providers. And I'm going to ask Vince Mason to come up from the RSM team, and I'll toggle over to his slides. We've got a series of topics to go through that will presumably move a little bit quicker than my hour-long time block. So we'll have a chance to go through a requirement under BEAD, digest that requirement, ask questions. And again, all of these materials are also posted online if you'd like to follow along, dhcd.virginia.gov/BEAD. So I'm going to toggle over to those slides, and Vince, please come on up.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Chandler, for that warm introduction. We'll do our best not to make things even more exciting than what you've seen already so far today, but we'll jump right in. All right. Build America, Buy America. In your applications, you need to be able to certify that you'll meet the Build America, Buy America requirements of the BEAD program. Basically, what that means is all of the components that you're going to purchase to build and operate the network with BEAD funding need to meet the Build America, Buy America requirements. We do know that in some cases, not all of the components that are typically used to build a network may necessarily be built in the United States today. Well, part of the goal of the BEAD program is to change that and reshore manufacturing of these items. That said, to balance the desire to close the digital divide, along with the intent to purchase products that are built in America, there's a defined set of requirements for components and how much of each component needs to be built or assembled here in the United States versus offshore in order to meet the requirement. Three areas where there's a partial waiver include non-optical glass, passive optical electronics, including OLT line cards, and enclosures. The specific requirements for each of these product types are defined. The Department of Commerce and NTIA have done a great job providing explicit guidance here. And we just need to make sure that we all follow the guidance that's been published. We've included links to the relevant guidance on each of these slides, and as Chandler has mentioned, if not already, it will be posted to the website so that it's available for future reference. Additionally, if you ever have a question, please do not hesitate to submit a question to the Office of Broadband so that we can provide a written response to you promptly. The Department of Commerce has a website where they're posting information from manufacturers of network components that are self-certifying that they're BABA compliant. When you go out to their website, you'll find which companies are self-certifying and which products within their product line they are self-certifying meet the manufacturing and assembly requirements in order to be BABA compliant and can be purchased with BEAD funding. Again, we've included links here because, as you can imagine, the number of companies that are reshoring manufacturing is growing. And for those companies that are reshoring their operations, the list of products they're producing is going to change over time. So you'll want to make sure you check that at application time, as well as subsequently post-award. You may want to continue to check that as well as you're actually starting to order product to build out the networks you've been awarded to build. What we've done here for illustrative purposes is just pulled a snapshot of the list of companies that have already self-certified as BABA compliant. And we've also provided an example of a single page from an unnamed manufacturer to give you a sense on the information that they're providing. It's not 100% consistent. It's a little bit different depending upon the manufacturer. But generally, the information that you require to write a high-quality application is there. That's the long and the short of it on Build America, Buy America. You need to certify that you're only going to use Build America, Buy America products in your network build at time of application. Are there any other questions at this point? Okay. Yes, sir.
Can you clarify that last statement? You said you need to verify you're only due. At the same time, you said there's no. How are you going to?
The list of products is what you need to focus on. Right. The list of products that the manufacturers are self-certifying as BABA compliant and meeting the requirements. That's where you need to look to source your items.
All right. So long as we use those sources,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have to do anything.
Because the company is self-certifying, if you're using their product,
Right.
then you'll be meeting the requirements of the BEAD program.
Gotcha.
And if I could put a plug in here too, on behalf of Vince, we've done a pretty tremendous job of trying to clarify for folks what is due at the time of application versus what is due at the time of contract negotiation with us, and what's going to be an ongoing requirement for you under the BEAD program. So when Vince just wrapped up his previous comments there about BEAD, Vince, I believe you mentioned BABA is something you have to certify at the time of application.
Right, that you're going to meet the requirement.
Right, that you're going to meet the requirements. There are other provisions that we're going to go through in the next couple of hours that will clarify, at time, is this required at the time of application? Is this required during the pre-contract phase, or is this an ongoing requirement? Is it all the above? This is also all available online in the resources we have posted in the resource index as well.
Thank you, Chandler. All right, our next topic is environmental and Historical Preservation, also referred to as NEPA and NIPA. Does someone have a question online? Or do we just have someone that needs to mute? There we go. All right. Thank you very much for whoever was online that just muted. Thank you. Environmental and historical protection, also referred to as NEPA, the Environmental Protection Act, as well as NIPA, the Historical Preservation Act. All right. Again, this is another area of regulation that you need to ensure that you agree to meet. We also need to see in your application that not only you're going to meet environmental and historical protection requirements, but we also need to see a timeline from you based on your experience and the build areas for which you're submitting proposals for, how many calendar months you expect it to take to go ahead and complete all of your permitting activity. So this is where we're going to start talking about application time versus pre-contract phase. And at application time, we just want to make sure that you document the permitting activity that you anticipate undertaking as part of your project, and then writing some narrative around that, and then putting together a milestone schedule of how long you think that will take. And then the actual permitting work, we wouldn't expect to start until further along in the process. And I know that Dr. Holmes has made some arrangements to help ISPs when it comes to permitting around environmental and historical. So I'm going to ask Dr. Holmes to take a moment here to share what kind of help is going to be available to ISPs to meet these requirements. Once we get past the technology. There you go. That'll work just fine. Thank you.
All right, so by show of hands, how many companies have done an environmental review or historic preservation? By show of hands, how many of you had to do it with either USDA funding or other federal funds? How did you all like that process? I see a lot of shaking heads. Okay, so as part of our BEAD program, we're currently in conversations with the Virginia Association of Planning District Commissions to come in and serve as a paid consultant on retainer for you all during the pre-contract period if you choose to use them to actually do your NEPA and historic preservation checklist. So basically prepare your document for submission to our agency for review and submission to NTIA for approval. And we're currently in negotiations with them. We're not sure which PDCs are going to participate, which is why we're contracting with the association. And so they will be available to you all. We will pay them directly on your behalf to do that work if you are an awardee under the BEAD program.
This slide here depicts a sequence of events that you would want to include on your milestone schedule.
Hey, before we move forward, I have a question. This is Philip Macris on behalf of Talkie Communications. If that's
Sure.
okay, to ask Tamara, Dr. Holmes, this question. So we talk about this in the NEPA. If you're doing a fiber build, you're probably going to be under a categorical exclusion
Yes.
because you're going to be in the right of way. If not, you might be wireless and you might have to put up a tower somewhere that might be in sensitive areas. But most of the time, it's going to be down the right of way. For that, just, kind of chocolate and vanilla approach, I mean, I guess, is there a specific approach you want for that in particular? Because it's pretty straightforward. It is a categorical exclusion if it's in the right of way. But what are you looking for relative to in the application on
So
this?
in the application, you're going to certify that you're going to comply with NEPA and historic preservation requirements. As Vince shared in the previous slide, there are steps throughout the application, the post-application, and pre-contract period. And so, in essence, what I shared earlier was that for those of you who are not interested in doing your own environmental review record, which includes compliance with NEPA and historic preservation, under the pre-contract period, we're building a relationship with VAPDC to cover the cost for that for you and let them complete the documents that are required to be submitted to us during the pre-contract phase. And so you are correct. There are actually an extensive list of categories that are excluded under this program. However, you still have to do the entire environmental review checklist and submit that for a review and approval through us to NTIA. And so we're offering that as a resource. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. But when we do the application, you said you have to put out a proposed timeline on that, or is that something that would happen afterwards?
As part of the application, you have to, so under NTIA's umbrella, they're calling everything permits. And so environmental review and historic preservation, that document falls under permitting. And so this is just one component of what's permitting, and I don't want to steal Vince's thunder, and so I'll let him talk about what that includes, but the timeline, not just inclusive of the ERR, but also all things permitting. And so Vince, I'll let you finish talking.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Dr. Holmes.
This slide here depicts the series of activities over time that NTIA has provided us guidance on. Again, this is great guidance that we just received that we really appreciate receiving, that help us navigate the requirements for permitting. When I look at an application, I would just expect an acknowledgement that you understand the process you need to go through to secure the permits, and you include that block of time that it's going to take for the project area that you're proposing. And in fact, again, we have an example here of the type of an example schedule that would be completed and submitted with a project application. And to your point, we anticipate the vast majority of projects will be eligible for one or more of the categorical exclusions, and I'll get to those in a couple of slides. And we've also received guidance from NTIA on, based on their hard work, what they anticipate the length of time may be to go ahead and secure the different types of permits that are required, depending on whether or not you have a categorical exclusion, in which case it'll take 3 to 6 months. If an environmental assessment is required for some reason, if there's new construction or something that's going on where you may not be in an existing right-of-way, for example, then you might fall into that category. And last but not least, none of us would want to get into a situation where there would be a full environmental impact statement, but those typically take 1 to 2 calendar years. So the good news is the vast majority of projects we expect would be going down the path of a categorical exclusion. And more good news, there is a standard form for environmental and historical preservation, and that is the SF-299. So utilizing mapping tools that are available as well as the 299, we can go ahead and step through the process and make sure everything is documented properly. Dr. Holmes has just outlined the help that will be available through the PDCs to go ahead and complete that documentation. And then the Office of Broadband will be reviewing all of that documentation to help ensure that it's complete and accurate prior to submitting that to NTIA for approval. And this is just a sample of a blank 299. While there are items to fill out on this form, as you can imagine, there are several attachments. There's a series of attachments that are required in order to complete the submission. So that is where either using existing resources you may have within your own organization or using the PDCs, you can step through that process. Okay. This just talks about the levels of NEPA review. As we've already discussed, the vast majority of projects will fall under categorical exclusions. So we need to make sure those project descriptions are completed and accurate, and then the mapping and screening is done. Once that's finished, then working with the Office of Broadband, we can confirm whether or not it looks like a categorical exclusion is going to apply. And then the subgrantee, having been awarded the project, would go ahead and complete the remainder of the paperwork to make sure it's all ready for submission to NTIA for final approval. Environmental assessments follow a similar path. It's just more complicated if, in fact, the work is not going to be done in the existing right-of-way, or it doesn't qualify for one of the over 40 categorical exclusions that have been established for the BEAD program. Okay, we're starting to get into the list of categorical exclusions here. I'm not going to read each one of them to you, but we do have them here in the deck, as well as there's additional information online. If not on the Office of Broadband site, there's definitely plenty of information available on the NTIA and other websites. As well as if you have any questions in this area, please feel free to reach out to the Office of Broadband. Okay, guidance and resources. This is a list of the guidance that's already been provided to help us all, this list, help us understand what's required around permitting. As was mentioned earlier in today's presentation, the guidance continues to evolve as questions come in from sessions like this, as well as sessions that are occurring in other states. And where it makes sense or we need that kind of help, we're working with our partners at NTIA to go ahead and ensure that we identify an appropriate course of action, get that guidance developed and published so that everyone's clear on what the requirements are, and we continue to maintain that level playing field when it comes to defining, awarding, and building BEAD-funded networks. There's also additional guidance forthcoming. These are topics that NTIA has already acknowledged. Additional guidance is required, and we're looking forward to that guidance being issued. Once it is issued, then along with the other notifications that you're going to be receiving from the Office of Broadband, we'll make sure that you're notified of these guidance items as they come out so that we can go ahead and incorporate them into the program appropriately. And with that, we're finished with permitting, unless anyone has any additional questions they'd like to raise now, and we'll do our best to answer them.
I can't believe it.
It's such an exciting topic. I don't understand. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and welcome one of my RSM colleagues, Hayden Grimm, to take over from here and take us through some additional narrative requirements that you can go ahead and start working on in the application portal since it's been opened effective December 1st.
Alrighty, hello everyone. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to step through a few of the additional application components. The first three will be areas where the applicant is looking to demonstrate their capability. So the first one will be financial capability, Then next, I believe, will be managerial, and finally, technical capability. And you'll notice that Chandler mentioned we do have 2 policy notices already out on declining high-scoring applicants based on managerial and technical capabilities. So these are a few of the really key component sections of the application that we really want to highlight and show you, what we expect an applicant to submit here, what a compliant response looks like, and just make sure that this is a section where, hopefully everyone is getting a pass, because we don't want to have to go and decline any applicants based on any of these sections. With that being said, we'll go ahead and we can start with financial. So you'll see here, the first thing that is kind of encompassed in this section is that the applicant has to demonstrate financial capability by submitting one of 2 documents, and they have a choice between these 2 options. The first being a letter of credit, and the second being a performance bond. We have templates following this slide, but these are your 2 options to kind of demonstrating that financial capability. And then when you submit those will get reviewed by our team along with the DHCD to determine that there are no high risks related to your financial status here. And then at the same time in the application, you do need to submit a few business plans and related analyses to substantiate the sustainability of the project, those including cash flow and balance sheet projections, 3 years of operating cost, and cash flow projections after the project has been completed. So here we just have a little bit more of a detailed look into those 2 different options. Like I said, so you've got option 1, which is the letter of credit, and you've got option number 2, which is the performance bond. There is guidance from NTIA, a little bit more specific detail regarding those 2 different options, but it's really up to your entity to determine which one is most appropriate and which one you'd like to pursue. Each one has pros and cons. So that's up to you to do the research to decide, which is going to be the most appropriate and which ultimately you attach in your application. And here's just an example. We wanted to kind of, as we go through this, make sure that, you have a general idea of what some of these templates or some of these forms may look like. You saw that with Vince demonstrating the standard form 299, just so that when you go through and you are doing the application, it's not your first time seeing it. So here's just an example of one. This is what a performance bond could look like. This is verbiage taken from an association that's well accredited and will likely be issuing a lot of these performance bonds for the BEAD projects. Before we move on to managerial capability, any questions on demonstrating financial capability? Excellent. So like I mentioned before, this is a really key topic here. This is one that our team is going to be reviewing at a very high level of depth, right? So we're going to look into these response areas that we're kind of highlighting in section 2 here. And this will be an area where we are really looking and reviewing to make sure that there are no obvious gaps in your organization's capability. So on this slide, we're going to break down, what is needed to be included at the application stage. So the first and foremost is a form of documentation. So we're going to need resumes for all key management personnel and any necessary project organizational charts, detailing any corporate relationships. So I'll provide an example of that a little bit later on. And additionally, we're looking to receive a narrative describing the applicant's readiness to manage the broadband network. And you've got bulleted the different components of that narrative that need to be included. And I'll touch a little bit further on some of the specifics of these in the next 2 slides. But we need to see the experience and quals of your key management for the project, experience undertaking projects of similar size and scope, any recent or upcoming org changes, including mergers and acquisitions, any relevant organizational policies, key individuals, and a brief description of your history managing state or federal grants projects for broadband. So here are 2 of the really key components of this application section, and it's your description of your experience undertaking projects of similar size and scope. So here we've kind of laid out, what do we want to see in this application section, because this is a narrative portion. This is your opportunity to show us, hey, this is something we're well versed in. This is something we have experience in. So these are a few of the components that application narrative section could include. And similarly, for your experience managing state or federal grants and constructing broadband facilities, there is some overlap here, but you'll notice that there are a few differences. But this is just to help everyone understand the things that we're going to be reviewing for. Like Chandler has harped on several times, we really want that open, fair, and transparent application review process. So we're putting forward, hey, these are the topics that we really want applicants to touch on in that narrative. So then when it comes to the org chart, I'm sure we all have some experience with organizational charts. The key here is that it's not just your organization. If there is a parent company or any subsidiary, we just want to see that relationship factored in there. It doesn't need to be very detailed, but we do just want to understand where your organization fits into the larger scheme of things, if applicable. Any questions on managerial capability? All right, so now for technical, it'll follow a similar flow to the previous ones. And I'm not going to walk through every single one of these, but essentially for technical capability, each applicant must submit a narrative that touches on each one of these topics. And it's a lengthy list, so I won't go into every single one, and it actually continues into the next phase. But it's important to note that a few of these topics must be certified by a professional engineer, basically saying that the project is feasible. And that's something that we'll be reviewing for, excuse me, not just that you have that information, but that those key sections are certified by the appropriate individuals. And here's a little bit of a breakdown of those bulleted points. So you'll see, okay, so if we're asking questions about supply chain, for example, tell me about your any supply chain constraints, mitigation strategy, any strategy about labor shortages. When we're talking about project development, discuss planning, discuss preliminary engineering, final design, current permitting process status. So this is kind of just a different way of viewing these bulleted points. And these are aspects of that application in the narrative that we want to see and that we're going to be reviewing for. So if you touch on each one of these things throughout the narrative, it's going to be complete. And we won't have to go through and go back into the process that Chandler outlined earlier, where we're coming back and saying, hey, it doesn't look like this answer is fully sufficient. So this is just another way for us to visualize what's required for this section. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sorry about that. There we go.
Hi, I got a question on the professional engineer. Is there any specific qualifications that are being required? Does it need to be a VA, state-specific professional engineer or anything? It's unqualified exactly, the type of professional engineer. I don't know if there are any qualifications around it. Like a Virginia licensed professional engineer, or if it has to be, I know NTIA had some type of waiver on that, but I don't know exactly what you're requiring. I just off the top of my head.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's a great question. And so there aren't any specific qualifications that are required by either the NTIA or the Office of Broadband at this point in time. There is, like you mentioned, some guidance about what can or what needs to and what doesn't need to be certified by the professional engineer. But at this time, what we'll do is if you have someone certified, we'll go back and look into it and determine if it's a reasonable certification or not. We won't go ahead and put a limit on who or what could be certified there. If we go back and we do our research and it appears that this person has no experience in the engineering field, that's going to raise some questions, but there's not a certain list of certifications at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent, thank you.
Excuse me, this is Charles Thomas, and I do apologize. I'm caught a cold. NTIA did put out some specific guidelines on professional engineer, what that would look like. One of the specifics to that is that the PE has to be certified in the state where the project is being built. So that's just one of the pieces of guidance that they put out on that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And then Jill,
I thought they granted a waiver of that. I thought I saw something on there. Am I mistaken, Charles?
Yeah, I haven't seen no specific waiver to the date of that of any waiver on that. Now there were waivers in other programs, but I have not seen one specific to BEAD.
Hayden, this sounds like a good opportunity to plug our FAQ document that's coming out.
Yeah, so we will be putting together an FAQ, and we have posted FAQs from previous sessions here. But what we'll do is any questions that we get that we aren't able to answer in this forum right now, or that are submitted, we're going to post a polling link afterwards. We're going to create an FAQ document that answers some of these questions, and that'll be linked with NTIA guidance and resources in those answers. But we will go ahead and we'll take this one back because it sounds like there's some uncertainty from the group regarding this. But at this time, yeah. Chandler, I believe we had another question.
Yes. Can you just repeat the whole thing, please? I'll speak.
Hi, I'm Jill with Timmons Group. Question about the technical capability portion. One, will we need to submit a schedule to go in with the timelines that these items, would take when we're going through each one of the supply chain process, make ready, all of that? And the second is, what about the lessons learned that we've applied to make sure that these are not only that we have the technical capability, but we've streamlined them?
Yeah.
Is that taken into account, is my question.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit of a two-part question, and I'll answer the second first because it's at the top of my mind. So there's always the opportunity in your narrative for you to demonstrate how you have streamlined things, and that's something that we're looking for, right? If you're able to go above and beyond and say, hey, not only can we touch on all of this, but here's how we have improved it, here's how we've made it more efficient, that's something that we would absolutely take into account in our review. And then remind me of, sorry, you had the first part to that? The schedule. Yes, so the question was, do we need to incorporate these activities into any specific schedule or build out? And the answer is yes, but not to this exact level of granularity and detail. There are other application sections that require you to submit a milestone schedule for permitting, as Vince touched on, and then also just an overall project build out schedule for a few of the other sections. And you'll take into account some of these details where there will be overlap, but it might not be this exhaustive list.
A follow-up question that may be in the FAQ. The previous slide had a professional engineer certifying milestones and the timeline. Would that apply to the NEPA and Historical Preservation Act activities, or just the construction of the broadband network?
No. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. The answer there is that it doesn't. The professional engineer certification doesn't apply to the NEPA milestone schedule or any of the plans there. That's just specifically for actually these 4 bullets. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is Phil. I just put in the chat the link to the NTIAP waiver that I'm seeing, a programmatic waiver. So you have it at your fingertips. And so it does state in there, it clarifies that the PE making certification connection with the PE certification requirement may be licensed in any of the 56 eligible entities. So that was the clarification. And the reason why I asked my question is, although there may be a programmatic waiver out there by NTIA, you may have more strict requirements than what NTIA may require. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Appreciate that clarification. And to my knowledge at this time, Chandler, Virginia is not implementing any more strict guidelines on what that engineer should be. Correct?
That's correct. We are abiding by the most up-to-date waivers issued by NTIA on the engineering requirement front, including most recently, I think some folks in the room made comments about additional certification requirements of professional engineers. There have been NTIA guidance that has been published that kind of reduces the requirement of things that have to be certified by a professional engineer. Our guidance documents are up to date on what has been eliminated from the certification process for professional engineers. We got one more question out here.
Okay.
Thanks, Tristan McDonald, Broadband Association of Virginia. On the next slide, you talk about Make Ready. Could you talk a little bit more about Make Ready? Certainly been a priority in Virginia. Do we as the ISPs need to talk more specifically about challenges we've seen in that area, or will that be something that DHCD and you all look into a little bit further on the back end as we're submitting applications?
Good question. This is Chandler from the broadband office. That's one of the aspects that we want to see spelled out by applicants under the technical capability section when it comes to any potential hurdles that may need to be cleared during the process of broadband deployment. So that's something we're going to be looking at in particular when we evaluate whether or not we are going to move forward with awarding a high scoring awardee in particular, because we want to make sure those considerations have been fully vetted by applicants and factored into the process of their application and built into the budget to overcome when project deployment's happening.
Perfect. Thank you, Chandler. Any other questions on technical capability? Perfect. All right, so we can go ahead and keep moving. So we did just include a sample network diagram. You know, these can vary, but this one includes a lot of the core components that'll be required. And it's just kind of, again, an opportunity for us to show, hey, this is what a compliant response could look like. Doesn't have to be exactly like this, but this is an option. All right, so we'll transition away from these sections where we're demonstrating capabilities, financial, et cetera, and look into the cyber and supply chain risk management requirements. So this might be a new area for a lot of our applicants here, as this hasn't been required on very many federally funded projects, especially related to broadband. So we'll go ahead and we'll just go through the overview of what needs to be submitted in the application, as well as a few of the templates and plans that we've put together to kind of make our applicants' lives easier and things that they can utilize directly and submit. So here you'll see that there are two main deliverables for this section. The first being a cybersecurity risk management plan, and the second being a cyber supply chain risk management plan. And we've got a few of the differences between the two called out here. They're references to different guidance, and you'll see that as we move through the templates, there are slight differences. But the key is just that you're demonstrating, hey, we understand that there are risks related to these two. Here's our risk mitigation strategies. Here's our plans for these two. And you'll submit those two plans to the Office of Broadband for their review. So this is a little bit of a breakdown about the two different plans. This is a cybersecurity supply chain, or cyber risk management plan. Within the plan, there are certain different things that the applicant will submit or fill out, essentially. So we've got those listed on the right-hand side. And then along with the plan template, we have developed a checklist. So as you're going through and you're building out that plan, you're able to have this Excel checklist that I'll show shortly. And you're able to basically have your plan up, you're filling out section by section, and the checklist, you're able to see, all right, this is the requirement here. We've fulfilled this, you check that off and you keep moving. That way it helps you make sure that you're submitting a fully complete and compliant response, and obviously makes our lives easier because then we're not having to go back and forth with you during that review period in March. Same goes for the cyber supply chain risk management plan. As I mentioned, both of the templates are very similar. There are slight differences between the two, but they're used in a very similar way. They're just two different deliverables that you'll attach to your application. So here's a little bit of a look at what the plan template looks like. So it's in narrative format, likely housed in Word or whatever word processor you prefer. And you'll see that we've gone in and put in red instructions, essentially saying, hey, this is what you should be discussing here. Please delete these instructions and replace with your own verbiage. And then there are sections where we've actually drafted your template language and highlighted, all right, put your vendor name in here, so forth, provide any further updates. And the goal here is to make it so that you can go in and really plug and play, that you're not having to craft this entire new plan from scratch for both cyber and supply chain risk management. And I know you probably won't be able to read this, but this is a look at what that checklist looks like. So as you're going through the plan on the following slide, you're able to have this up right next to you. You look at step number, section number, steps to incorporate, et cetera, and you're able to check it off or highlight it if there's an area or a gap where, hey, you may need to bring in some additional knowledge, or you may need to work a little bit further on. All right, so that concludes cyber and supply chain. That was a little sneak peek at what we have tomorrow. Do we have any questions on cyber and supply chain risk management?
I do have a question related back to the professional engineer certification. My name is Crystal Duke with Breezeline.
Absolutely, go right ahead.
Some states have provided the option to waive the PE certification during the application phase, and I was wondering if Virginia had considered that.
Hey, Crystal, this is Chandler from the broadband office. We're not aware of such an option presented to states by NTIA and did not have that option available to our applicants.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Chandler.
And Hayden, one more thing. I think just to put a point on this, I think the RSM team has gone above and beyond here to provide templates for applicants to use when it comes to putting together a cybersecurity plan and a supply chain risk management plan. So would really recommend that you refer to those templates when you're developing your BEAD application, and then especially these checklists as you go along, right? This goes back to our advice that when you're developing any section of narrative in our application process, it's probably a great idea to have up our punch list of requirements of what are the minimum requirements to meet in that section to be considered NTIA compliant and Virginia Broadband Office compliant, so we can then review what you've submitted in other phases of the application process. And we don't have to bug you during the month of March to resubmit missing or incomplete or non-compliant information. So please do reference this template. If you don't use it, it's a good resource anyways to go in and make sure that your cybersecurity plan that you perhaps already have on file is going to be compliant with the BEAD rules and regulations.
Absolutely. Yep. Great point, Chandler. And these, both the template, the plan template and the checklist are available on the DHCD BEAD website or directly on the homepage. All right. Any other questions? If not, I will wrap up and I can pass it back over to Chandler. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thanks, Hayden. Let me put this microphone back and I'll hop up there. Well, folks, we're concluding a bit earlier than expected, transparently. So I guess this would be a good time just to really open it up to kind of hear from the group about questions you have on BEAD, anything we've covered today, perhaps what we're going to cover tomorrow. I will go ahead and put up the day 2 slide deck to let folks know what is coming so you don't feel the need to ask questions about what those topic areas are today. But what questions might you have about content we've covered so far in the last couple hours? Anything? And Kevin, I am going to tag you back in to run a microphone if you don't mind. The question from the audience was, when are we going to have the list of letters of intent published online? The response to that is no later than next week. Sometime during next week at the latest, another way to say that. Hopefully sooner than that, but we will publish the letters submitted by each letter of intent submitter. The list of counties and cities from some of those submitters may have received exemption from the Freedom of Information Act, and that means they're exempt from disclosure, so we wouldn't publish where certain providers that have received that FOIA exemption, as we call it, we wouldn't publish the list of cities and counties that they've submitted a proposal to apply in their letter of intent. But the letter from each letter of intent submitter will be public. The list of cities and counties for every letter of intent submitter might not be public, depending if they requested and were granted exemption from FOIA.
Follow-up question to what you just said. For this, Philip Macris from Taki. Will there be a list that just says how many applicants or ISPs or proposed applicants are associated with each city, or just a number, even though they may have submitted it confidentially, where they're planning to apply?
Yes, there will. We're working to that map product and hope to have it ready for the Broadband Advisory Council meeting on Friday. So be sure to tune in. Yep.
Great. Yeah, I plan to. So thank you.
Yeah. The question from the group was, where can we get information about the Broadband Advisory Council meeting on Friday? If you'd like to attend online, the information is available at the Commonwealth calendar, which we can point you to after the meeting and share a URL to it. Okay.
Chandler, I have a question about the CAMS portal and the organizations. Right now, if you go into CAMS, there's 40 narrative questions. Would those be by organization, and then the ZCTA portal is ZCTA specific? So we have just one application on CAMS and then 200 on the other portal. Is that how it would work?
That's how it'll work. Yeah, just to repeat the question maybe for the folks online in case they didn't hear it, we've structured the application process in a way that you submit all of your bulk narrative responses in CAMS, and that suffices for every one of the applications you end up submitting in the zip code application portal. So at the end of it, if everybody that submitted a letter of intent, all 47 providers, submits an application, we'll have 47 applications in CAMS, meaning one per provider, and then however many hundreds of applications in the zip code portal, because you're submitting up to 2 applications per zip code. You could submit a bundled zip code, or you could submit an individual application for each zip code.
Hey, Chandler, it's Jen Halazinski from Comcast. I have a question. I apologize if I missed this, but you said that the templates and a checklist is on the website. I'm not seeing it. Is it in a particular location?
Happy to go to that. Thank you for the question. The cybersecurity and supply chain risk management templates are going to be in this long list of resources starting here. With the option to download the supply chain risk management plan and then the cybersecurity plan as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. But when we talk about pulling up side by side what our requirements are when you're drafting your application, what we mean there is that as an applicant, you're going to, let's just say, ownership summary requirements. And then in CAMS, you will see a list of questions for ownership summary requirements, and side by side, as you're writing your response to that question, you're also looking at this list of requirements here. Specifically kind of lays out the rationale behind why we require this, where the requirement comes from NTIA. For this ownership requirement, we do need you to kind of crack open this resource here of the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, and make sure you're certifying that you and comply with ownership information requirements. This is also boiled down in a separate version as well when it comes to the application guidance. This is the go-to document where I would recommend going first to understand what the BEAD application requirements are. It lays out the key steps of the process, minimum application area requirements, the whole 9 yards, available at the consolidated application guidance, now in version 1.2. This application guidance also has a comprehensive list of questions in it and submission requirements from CAMS, and also what you'll be required to submit for each individual zip code if you choose to submit a single zip code application or a bundled zip code application. That information is all located in the appendix, and so is the CAMS information that is required to submit for each one of your single narrative applications. Any closing questions before we elect to reconvene tomorrow morning?
This is Anna Calico with Vantage Point. What's the timeline for some of these future policy notices, particularly the mixed technology or alternative technology and then the consortium information? When is that supposed to be released?
Great question. We're working on developing all of those forthcoming future policy notices now. The one on alternative technology in particular is pending NTA releasing their final version of their alternative technology guidance that we can interpret and then put in the format for our applicants. The others are not pending NTIA guidance, and they're under development now. We're working on them. NTIA has put out all the guidance that we know they're going to put out on consortium applications and on assigning locations within awarded zip codes. So those are under development now. I can't commit to a timeline. We've got to go through the internal review process there, but we want to get those out as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Kuala with Eastern Shore of Virginia Broadband Authority. This is not specific to this, but I just want to know, we have a new incoming administration. Do you think that BEAD will be impacted in any way, maybe slow down, or some of the requirements being cut or added?
Yeah, Koala, it's a great question. We keep a close eye on that. At this point in time, we don't see major shakeups regarding BEAD. If anything, we see a emphasis that we utilize all technology types under the program, which thankfully is what we've been doing under the VADI program for the last 7 years now. So that's what we see on the horizon there. But we'll certainly stay attuned to that, especially when January 20th rolls around, and keep our folks updated as much as we can about changes we see out of federal government there. But yeah, for now we're moving forward and working on getting the job done. Okay, well, I don't hear any other questions online, see any other questions in person. So we'll wrap this up, reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. What I would ask you to do, if you have any questions after the meeting or didn't want to throw a hand up and ask a question now, go ahead and email those to the broadband email inbox. That's going to help us develop FAQs to send back out after this meeting, help us perhaps answer common themes of concern tomorrow as well. So Hayden, did I see a hand up there as well?
Do you mind pulling back up the PowerPoint deck really quick?
Sure.
We did create just a really quick poll. Just everyone to make sure that we're covering topics that are meaningful to you. So if you're able to, you can use the scan or use that link directly. Really quick, it should take less than 5 minutes. It's just asking, hey, how comfortable are you with these topics? How interested in topics? And then providing an opportunity to ask questions, then directly incorporate FAQ if we weren't able to comprehensively cover. So if you're able to do this, that'll just help us help you out.
Cool.
The website tonight. Today's presentation.
We weren't planning on posting until after the 2-day event. But after tomorrow, yes, these slides will be public online along with the recording of the presentation. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the evening in Richmond. Let us know if you need anything in the meantime. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.